So William and I were talking about it. And well, so imagine that the developer can get
Okay. Let's get started. So Ludwig is describe, thanks, the note-taking scribe. No, you write down the notes wherever you want, but yeah, if someone has a chance to also join the Java chat, that would be helpful, because I see Justin, Phil, and two other gentlemen on the remote side.
Is he going to see for reserved for the Java scribe?
Do we have someone who's on Java? Leif, are you Java? I don't know Java. Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks. Okay. In sort of the introductory words, I wanted to sort of point you briefly to the workshop that we had a few days ago. Here's a sort of a group picture of the folks who attended the workshop, and you may actually recognize some of them. So it was on Thursday, Friday last week in Trier. We met. This was a workshop that we announced already earlier this year in response to the per invitation only workshop that we had last December. So this one was public. There was a position paper requirement, and various folks provided position papers. And you can see the links here. There's a schedule where you can download both the slides, the papers, and there are also two invited talks with the slides on those on that web page. It was I thought it was an interesting mixture of both sort of contributions from the formal community with their analysis, and our host has contributed an updated version of their paper, of their formal analysis that they had done. And then also from the side of those researchers who work on the implementations itself, sort of implementation security. And one of that effort, which is the last link on that on the bottom of the slide, is this professors. It's a test tool that researchers have developed in response to, or as an outcome of the discussion we had in December. Essentially, they tried to develop test cases and a test automation to test for known or security vulnerabilities. So this may be something you may find interesting, and this GitHub repository was put live during the meeting, during the workshop last week. So, a bit useful stuff. Coming to the current status, as you can see, we had a very ambitious plan, and I don't think we have managed to actually deliver the items in the indicated time. So as part of the presentations today, and also at the second session on Wednesday, I would like to update the milestones and put something a little bit more realistic there. The only thing I believe that we don't discuss during this meeting is the last item on this list, which is the document that Nat is editing, I think with John, the request by JWS for Oauth 2. So where are we with that?
You sent in some comments that...
Can we use the microphone?
Microphone. The other thing is the phone. Microphone.
Does this play Pokemon? Sorry. Hannah sent in some comment. John Bradley. Hannah sent in some comments, and the negligent editor has not actually put them in yet, but if I have some time tonight, I will. And update it.
Yeah, so we are close on. This is close to getting done. Let's say.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you didn't find anything significant. It's mostly editorial stuff. So I think it's probably going to be ready for last call after that. At least getting people to have a serious. We need to get other people to have a serious look at it, and that tends to be a way to motivate people. But yeah, it's been stable for a long time. It's been deployed as part of OpenID Connect with feedback for a long time. Not widely adopted, but it's been out there.
So that's good. Yeah, please make the update and then we wrap this up. I think we issued the working group last call already last year, which yeah. Good. So the agenda for today is we have those items: token exchange, which Brian is going to talk about first, and then we have the native apps. We talk about the device flow and the AMA values. And then on Wednesday, we continue with the authorization server discovery metadata mix-up, the token binding proof of possession type of topic. And then there's also this document I did a call for adoption to the group earlier this year, and it was not conclusive. So we're going to talk about that again. Good. Brian, do you want to come forward?
Hannes, are these presentations uploaded?
Oh, no.
There was nothing uploaded.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Complaint from the remote part.
Okay. That's a good. Yep. That's true. I forgot that. So you want to start already while I upload?
We need the slides. Drop the slides a little bit.
Okay, you didn't. Okay. Yeah.
No.
I know. I'm uploading the slides now.
You should just plug yourself in and check them for me. You could sing, you dance.
Let me quickly do that. Token exchange.
Bill, distract them.
So while we're waiting for that, we were talking earlier about token binding. So just a heads up on the schedule at IETF this week. There's a token.
Keep typing, don't listen to it.
Okay.
So the topic of Oauth is going to be raised tomorrow at the token binding work group. So if you're interested in Oauth token binding, it would be definitely worth attending that working group. And then as Hannes noted, the actual kind of like the main token binding Oauth talk is on Wednesday. But yeah, just to let everyone know that if token binding is something that you're interested to definitely come on Tuesday as well.
Good. Good. Okay, now we are ready. So Brian. Is that, what is the presentation mode here? Okay. This is one.
Ready to roll? All right. I'm going to talk about Oauth 2 token exchange. Sort of a just brief update at this point. There's a photograph cribbed from the last time we were out here I took. Stole it from the original page. It's not the one on this one though. Anyway, I wanted to start off with a quick example just for those that maybe aren't familiar with the work. This is one illustrative example. It's certainly not inclusive of everything you can do, but I thought it might shed a little bit of light on what's enabled by this little protocol. What this example illustrates is the exchange of a regular OAuth token presented to the front end, exchanged for something that's more appropriate for use on the back end. So what we have first here in step 0 is a regular old OAuth token is obtained via whatever grant type or flow might have happened. That doesn't really matter for this example. It's presented in the first step as a regular bearer token via the OAuth 2 bearer token stuff. In the next step, I can't see my own stuff here, but basically this in steps 2 and 3 show the token exchange protocol. Step 2 is the actual token request. So there's the token exchange grant type there. The subject token is the access token received on the previous call. And the token type indicates simply that it's an access token. The authorization server gets this, processes it. I think actually there's a resource indicating the backend bit there. And the authorization server gets this, processes it, knows that the target of the next invocation is this backend API. So it's able to mint a token appropriate for that, returns that in a normal OAuth 2 response from the token endpoint. You see there, it's in the JSON on the bottom left, the access token is the new token. The issued token type indicates that this is also an access token, bearer type, and gives some hints about its expiry, how long it's going to live. And then the sort of intermediate system there, the resource server can turn around, use that to make a call embedding that token like a normal OAuth token in the header to the backend system. This is just one kind of use case enabled by this, but it's one that I think is illustrative of some of the things that you can do and how pretty basic and simple the protocol is to get tokens, exchange tokens for the appropriate target resources. I got it. So the current status of this spec is draft 5 was published on July 8th. Yeah, that was the cutoff date with relatively minor changes. We added a CID JWT claim that's there to express the client identifier of the client that requested the token. Added token introspection response parameter registrations for ACT and may ACT claims, similar in definition to how they were defined previously for JOT. The refresh token, the language around that was changed to optional from not recommended based on some feedback from real world deployment experience, not of this specific protocol syntax, but of similar facilities done in production at Microsoft. Attempted to clarify what is and continues to be, but is hopefully a little bit better, the distinction between JOT and access token URIs and how they're used both in the request and the response, kind of explaining a little bit better that a JOT is just generally a JOT and an access token could be a JOT or any other format, but it's indicative that it was a token issued by the authorization server in question. And I went through and tried to clean up some of the open issues based on lack of feedback or feedback about it and sent some emails trying to make sure that those were the right things to do. Basically, the things that were taken out were, we talked briefly about allowing for short names in the URIs. Some people liked it, some people didn't. It kind of just sat around for a while and eventually just took it out. So everything's a full URI now in terms of types. And there was a expressed need a long time ago, in addition to the inbound 2 tokens that can come in now, to have some way to provide supplementary information or claims in the request to go into the issued token in addition to the stuff that's already there. And I saw a presentation by the guy that originally asked for this that ended up using the actor token to accomplish the same needs. So after talking with him a little bit and polling the group to see if there were other use cases I was missing, it seems pretty clear that this is sort of, you're not going to need it. It's more than is necessary, and the use cases we envisioned were accomplished via what's already in the standard. So I pulled this out. There was no support in the spec, but there was a sort of an open issue to do, and I just removed that because I don't think it's necessary anymore. So those are the changes in 05. Moving forward, sort of current status, I saw that July was the target date to progress this on your previous bit, Hannes, and obviously we're not going to make that, but I do believe it's getting close. There's one basic large open issue in the open issue section of the document, and that's basically accounting for proof of possession style tokens. And this, as I think we're all realizing, is not exactly straightforward, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it right now. There's a couple of things we need to account for. One is both tokens inbound, verifying proof of possession of inbound tokens in the exchange, and also issuing tokens outbound that have some sort of proof of possession semantics in them. Token binding seems to be the prevailing sort of future around doing bound tokens with OAuth, and I think that it's probably prudent to at least see how some of the token binding work shakes out and whether this can reference it, repeat it, or sort of just inherit that work in general. But I'll also mention that there is some sort of diversity in use case too. It might not necessarily all be token binding. The previous presentation I was mentioning where it was at Salesforce, Chuck Mortimer at Salesforce showed it, and he was doing a proof of possession type of use case in the context of what's already in the spec, where the actor token was signed by a key that was embedded on the client, an IoT type client, and that ended up in the confirmation method of the issued token. So there's already some facility for it. And I'm basically just saying we should probably sort of hold off and see how things play out, particularly with respect to token binding before we make any moves on this.
Justin has comments. Inbound pop tokens could be handled pretty easily as it's the AS that looks things up.
That probably means something, but it went right over my head.
That's the second one.
Oh, is there? The AS doesn't validate the pop token request itself, but looks up the token identifier.
Unless it needs to validate.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's cases where the AS would need to do the proof of possession from the client. There may be cases where there aren't. The case that I showed in the first example actually is probably a case where the proof of possession isn't done by the AS, because that's taken care of, assuming that was a pop token, that would be taken care of between the client and the resource server. But I do believe there'll be cases where proof of possession between the client and the authorization server are necessary. And yeah, how exactly and how much detail to go into in the document about that is an area where at this point I'm just uncertain.
John Bradley. As we dig into it, so you could imagine that a client wanting to do token exchange may get a proof of possession jot as the first part of the flow. Then we get into the philosophical question of when it goes to exchange that at the token exchange endpoint, if it's a proof of possession token, do you reject it because because the proof is actually not for the person who originally issued the token and presented it to that client, perhaps the browser. So that client doesn't necessarily have the key to present that token. So we may actually have, scarily enough, we may actually have different levels of proof of possession. You may actually initially want to issue a token that says, yes, you who receive it needs to check that it came from somebody holding this key, but when you do token exchange, the token exchange AES needs to check it against a different key. So there's a bunch of probably fairly common use cases that may become more complex with proof of possession. We need to think some of those through before we leap off a cliff. So it isn't always, there may be, in these token exchange cases, there may be multiple levels of proof of possession that needs to be represented or at least understood by these tokens.
Yeah, the question for me is on what that means regarding the completion date. If we wait, it sounds like we don't really know, and the token binding work with regards to OAuth has just started, so it's hard to estimate on when that will be completed, right?
So, John Bradley again, I don't know that, at the level of token exchange, I don't think we want to be specific about the individual proof mechanisms for this. I think we can be a bit more generic. We don't want to get fixated on only supporting token binding because that works in some use cases, doesn't others. We need to also support mutual TLS and signed messages, etc. So I think we need to get at least the foundation of how these semantics are going to work and then leave the actual proof mechanisms for perhaps later as we sort out the individual confirmation methods. So I don't think in this document we want to dig down into the individual confirmation methods. We want to keep it at a slightly higher level.
Yeah, in which case, I think maybe one option would be to proceed with the document being more or less silent or offering general guidance around proof of possession, such that it would be similar to the other OAuth documents that we have now, and have that stuff layered on by possibly token binding type profiles that we would be working on in the future. I'm not sure which is better, but I think maybe that would be an option, which would allow this to progress.
Comment from, do you want to?
No, go ahead.
From Phil Hunt. I think we need to make the current draft bearer only. It's clear that POP variants are particularly complex, especially in cases across security domains like multi-AS.
One possibility would be to finish this document with the current scope and then sort of issue an update once we have an idea on how the other work shapes out and how it impacts this specific piece of work.
Certainly an option too. I would tend to prefer not to explicitly make it bearer only, but maybe a little bit of hand waving about how much detail goes into defining beyond bearer.
Justin Richard points out that introspection has a forward-looking POP reference in an appendix, and that maybe we could use that model.
I'll take a look at that. I mean, at some level, I think it comes down to two things. One is the presentation of the inbound token, how you do proof of possession on that, and then the requesting the right confirmation request, however you present the key or request the key in the outbound token, the issued token. There's not, at some level, there's not a whole lot to it. Another level, as John mentioned, there's a lot of different use cases that complicate things.
Yeah.
Senat Sakimura, can I just change the topic? Just one question. So this draft actually requires the STS to be the token endpoint. Is there any reason for that? Or,
Sorry, say that again?
this draft seems to be requiring STS to be the token endpoint. Is there any reason for that? Could it be something else on the token endpoint?
It's using the token endpoint largely to build on top of the constructs that are already there, both client authentication, the general request format, including the grant type, and then the response that's relatively well understood and defined. So yes, it is reusing the token endpoint, and that was intentional. It could have been something else, but that wasn't the direction that was taken.
I see. Yeah.
Nat, this is Nat.
He was Nat, I'm John again. So yes, it has to be a token endpoint. You ought not to assume that it has to be the token endpoint. It builds upon the semantics, but doesn't necessarily need to be the same token endpoint that an AS was providing other generic OAuth services.
That's true, though oftentimes will be the same.
Thanks. That was the kind of clarification I wanted to have. Maybe it's a good idea to say it explicitly in the draft.
Okay. What should we do with POP and?
Yeah, I think we should take a look at the model that Justin sort of exercised with the token introspection and see whether that could potentially be a way forward.
Okay, we'll do that.
And because that would, I believe that could get us fairly close to completion, as you say in your slide, and just need to figure out on. So some of the things that you're going to talk about next are minor. I would think that they could be.
I think so, yeah.
Could be even dealt with. Like some of it is more cosmetic. So, but you got a fairly good review on a mailing list just recently, and maybe we need some more. So we have. I don't think we have started the working group last call on that document. So because you guys also never told me that the document is really that close to completion to actually start that. But maybe we should figure out on when that could actually happen.
We can definitely do that. I've been sort of on hold around the proof of possession, but if there's other ways to move forward with it, we can certainly talk about that.
This is Mike Jones from Microsoft. I will say that, as we're going to talk about on Wednesday, that if you're using token binding, you can largely just reuse the syntactic pattern for our existing bearer tokens and move some of the proof of possession stuff into a tiny bit of the application. So we are going to have the oxymoron, if things play out the way that they're anticipated, of passing tokens using the bearer label in 6749, and yet they're actually not bearer tokens. It's just they conform to that syntax. And that may be the case with some of the use cases for token binding as well.
I agree. The one I'm thinking of in particular, I've forgotten the parameter name that you used, but in the token binding for OAuth drafts that you did to convey the token binding ID to the token endpoint at the application layer might be something that could come into play here is all. But again, that could be layered on later or implied just by the draft itself, or possibly incorporated into a larger token binding profiles type of document.
Right. So I do encourage people, when we're talking about token binding in 2 days, to also think about how the techniques discussed do or do not apply to your token exchange use cases.
All right, so moving on, just to get through this, a few other hopefully minor-ish things. The ID tokens have come up a few times in the concept of the draft. There was a URI added to express ID tokens a while ago that wasn't discussed real fully, and it's been mentioned as an odd example a few times. And I believe Tony has asked for something that could return basically the tuple or triplet of ID, access token, and refresh token. And one possibility here would be to follow on the model that's already provided by OpenID Connect, where the OpenID scope parameter basically indicates the desire for an OpenID transaction in the return of an ID token, which is somewhat loosely defined in Connect now, but could be called out here a little bit more specifically, that if you're interested in receiving an ID token in addition to the token that you're requesting explicitly in the transaction, to include the OpenID scope as you would in other non-front channel flows with OpenID Connect.
Yeah, Tony Nedlin. The other problem is what has been stated for composite. It's really not composite of what our use cases are. Our use cases are making sure that you have the issuer and the subject token and can combine those sets of claims together, whereas you have declared it as a single composite. So
where the claims are combined together.
Not the subject. No, the claims of the subject and issuer are not combined together.
I honestly don't understand what you're asking for. So if you could.
I did. I submitted a whole list of stuff that wasn't addressed.
I understand that you wrote an email.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to.
Okay, so if you respond to that, I will give you an example.
Okay. I'll raise it on the list as well, but I would be curious if for thoughts around something that I think would be implied as possible anyway around the use of the OpenID scope, but maybe being clear about its usage can sometimes be helpful, so people do the same thing consistently. And Mike.
I don't know, Mike Jones, Microsoft. My gut on that, at least for an OAuth token exchange spec, is that's kind of a hack. It may be an okay hack. I'd never heard this until right now, and I want to think about what we're trying to achieve with the hack, and if there's a more architecturally clean way to do it.
That's fair. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what I'm trying to achieve, other than some consistency with how some other things are done. and a use case expressed by Tony that I still don't understand. So that's maybe not a great place to design from.
Right. So yeah, this is John Bradley again. I guess the question is that the authors would have, we need more explanation or at least better understanding of why multiple tokens in the response versus perhaps doing multiple requests. I understand it's an optimization, but perhaps has ugly architectural consequences. So we'll need to.
It's the chaining. The chaining.
Normally that would be sequential and not in parallel. So
No, it's not necessarily. So we have use cases where we want multiples, to come back, but they're chained together.
So you want,
Going in and going back out are chaining.
so what do you mean? Like you send one request in and you get multiple tokens back?
Yeah.
But where's the chaining here?
The chaining is tying them back together.
Oh, the tokens are tied to each other somehow?
Yep.
How are they tied together?
They're multiple. You can look at it as possibly a jot that contains another jot that contains another jot that contains another jot. So they're chained together.
Ah, okay.
So
In the hierarchy.
Nested.
Yeah.
in which case it would be a
Nested or,
single token.
It's a single token, but it has encapsulated tokens inside the token?
I'm not sure you can look at it as a single token though.
Okay.
So we should probably have a more detailed conversation about this offline. Certainly we want to address the use case. Perhaps we don't quite understand. There may be some semantic differences between how we're approaching it.
Yeah, because what I hear is the solution. I don't hear the use case yet. What exactly the use case is?
Chain tokens.
Well, that's the solution.
Why don't, I'll seek to get some clarification on the list in response to.
Yeah, maybe have an idea on why we want to issue multiple tokens or why they are chained together in the first place.
Yeah, I would need to better understand that to try to address it here.
Yeah.
And I agree with John that we should see various different ways to address it before we start introducing multiple returns, if not necessary. So we'll table that, take it to the list. And then the last item on my agenda here is near and dear to my heart, and that's the title of this. A long time ago, I put a subtitle in that I think is rather clever, and it's sort of, I enjoy it. I've gotten a lot of comments from people that enjoy it, but as I was telling William the other night, I think that's probably a self-selecting group of people. Most people, till recently, don't come up and tell you they hate something. They'll tell you if they like it. So there's been some recent feedback on the list that they prefer, that some people prefer a more straightforward title. At this point, it feels like that's probably the way it needs to go. But if anybody has any super strong feelings one way or the other, I encourage you to voice them now and or on the list. I did include a little screenshot of a presentation I did there on the bottom right at a recent show, sort of breaking down the title. And I guess maybe it's not funny because if you have to explain the joke, it's not funny, but I tried to explain all the various nuances of the title itself. And in some ways, it's just sort of a last gasp on a little joke that I enjoyed before it goes away. But yeah, any other comments are welcome here on the list. And with that, I don't have anything else.
Good. Do we have maybe 2 reviewers of the document to see whether there's indeed most of the issues are resolved besides the ones that we just talked about? Anyone who would volunteer? William? That's great. Someone else? Thorsten, you are shaking now? Anyone? You guys are tired, I guess, from the tough IETF week so far. Very good. So did you raise your hand now, Thorsten? Oh, okay. Greeting. Okay, you greeted someone. Okay, but yeah, William, if you could have a look at this would really be useful. Good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Good. Which one do you want to start with? Oh, okay. Oops. Yeah, okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. William Dennis. I work on Google's identity team. And I'm going to be talking about the native apps draft best practice that I first drafted about a year ago. So the basic premise of this, I won't talk about this too long because I think I've already talked about it quite a fair bit, but the basic premise is that doing an Oauth flow in a web view is fairly insecure. The host app has the ability to read out the cookie jar or inject some JavaScript to mess with the authorization flow or perhaps like keylog the user's password. So it's generally, from a security point of view, a fairly bad pattern. And the other thing is that it violates the whole concept of single sign-on. With WebView, each cookie jar is completely siloed, so there's no ability to reuse sessions, which is not so great from a usability point of view. All right, so let's jump straight into the solution then. The best practice suggests that Oauth flows should use the system browser or the user's browser rather than an embedded browser to do Oauth. That's the basic principle of the best practice. You could pretty much distill it down into that. If you have a native app that needs to do Oauth, you can do the request in an external user agent, like the system browser, or if the platform supports it, maybe some kind of semi-embedded one, which is actually a separate processor, not inspectable by the host app. And the good thing is that the usability of this is actually pretty nice as well. So I'm going to run through actually 5 demos here, just to show you what the user experience is, because I really feel like this is a good user experience too. If we can start with video 1. So this is a native app on Android. And as you can see, this particular device has 2 users logged in, so the user can pick one of the existing users, review the consent, and approve it, all in a few seconds, all in a couple of taps. Let's play video 2. So this is a Windows 10 mobile device. And we're doing a sign in with Google. And as you can see, it's pretty much exactly the same experience. The mobile app opens up Edge, which loads the authorization request. There's a little CSS bug there. But the user reviews that request, approves, and immediately they're signed in. They've granted the scopes. In this app, they do.
It's a developer preference thing.
Yeah.
I included that just to prove that it's actually doing something.
Yeah. Demonstrating security stuff is sometimes complicated.
All right, let's try the 3rd video. So to round out the 3 mobile platforms, we have iOS. And probably no surprise by now, but it's exactly the same pattern here where the native app is opening that OAuth authorization request in the external user agent. The user's already signed in, so it's a very simple tap on the accept of the consent screen and they're signed in. So that's the mobile story. I think you can, I hope you agree that this is a pretty nice user experience in addition to having some really good security properties. So when you do OAuth correctly in the system browser, the app can't actually interrogate the page, it can't read out the cookies, it can't inject JavaScript. And as long as you're using PKCE, the PXE standard that was standardized by this work group last year, then it's extremely secure as well. Let's go to the next slide. Just click on the... All right, so here I'm demonstrating the same pattern on a desktop operating system. This is just a Windows traditional app. So again, the native app has just opened the user's default browser, in this case Edge. User's already signed in, approves the request, and the code is delivered back to the app. And so the point here is that this is really a generic pattern for all kind of native apps running on any operating system that needs to talk to a standards-based OAuth provider. And if we can get the next video. So one more demonstration. Now this is something that comes up actually fairly frequently in my case. And this is a command line app, like a CLI utility that needs some identity. We see this type of use case fairly frequently for like cloud-based services that need to, where the developer needs to authenticate their command line tool. And so here again, it's exactly the same as the other native app, really. Even though this is a CLI tool that has no UI, it's capable of loading up the browser. There is one case where this doesn't work, and that is if the user's like SSH'd into a remote server and there's no browser available. But the next thing that we're going to talk about, the device flow, is a potential solution for that environment. All right. Great. So that was just a kind of recap of the usability of this pattern. Let me talk briefly about some of the things that my team have done. So, like I said, I've kind of been pushing this for about a year now. And so the Android platform is now recommending this exact pattern for single sign-on for enterprise apps, including where Google is used as the IDP. And the official Oauth documentation for native apps also recommends this best practice too. So this is not just a theory, this is something that we're actively promoting and people are using. The other thing worth mentioning is that given that this alternative exists, my team is taking a fairly dim view on WebView recently, so you can probably expect that we're going to start to deprecate that. We haven't actually deprecated it yet, but its days are numbered, I think. All right, so since this is the IETF, let's talk about some run code. To promote this standard, or to promote this best practice, my team have done a bit of work trying to get some code, some libraries, and some samples out there. We created and then contributed to the Connect working group of the OpenID Foundation 2 client libraries, one for iOS, one for Android. These are complete Oauth client libraries for native apps. Those are the first 2 links. And recently, we also documented for our Google developers that are on Windows that wish to do an Oauth flow to us, say a Google sign-in flow, or like trying to get like a calendar scope or something like that. We also released some samples for Windows that they can take a look at as well. The other thing we published at Google I/O was the App Auth for Android Code Lab. This is a really great way to try out the Android project if you're interested. It's kind of a interactive tutorial that sort of shows you how to build and add this style of authentication into your native Android app. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's sort of interactive documentation, really good way to do it. I heard some feedback that from Japan actually, that the App Auth library was a little bit challenging on Android. I think there's a few kind of things that you have to get every bit right, otherwise it might not work. And so definitely recommend this code lab for anyone that's trying it on Android. All right, so what are the next steps? I need to add an appendix with some technical information about Windows. So the document is kind of structured. The main document is the normative section, the best practice. And then in the appendix, and it's strictly only in the appendix, we have a reference to certain platforms and potential libraries or tools that you can use to achieve this pattern. And we're not really expecting that the appendix will necessarily remain correct for very long. These platforms do change kind of on a yearly basis. So it's really just trying to capture the current state of the art. But I think, I would encourage people to mostly focus on the sort of body of the document for the pattern itself, which is, hey, just use the external browser, don't use the embedded browsers. But yeah, we hope this section might be helpful. So I do plan to add that maybe tomorrow even. So in summary, all the outstanding open issues have been resolved, I believe. It's been pretty stable actually for a year. The best practice hasn't broadly changed, although in the very latest update, I did take a few steps following some feedback, particularly from Mike, thank you for that, to kind of make the document a little bit more platform agnostic and sort of more generally applicable, removing some of the overly sort of UX optimizations that I'd included. And we still talk about it a little bit, but it's more of a sort of aside than part of the core best practice. And yeah, the other thing is we do have quite a few interoperable implementations now. I know PingFed is using this and promoting it. We had Glue and who else? The Django OpenID Connect Provider, Okta, a whole bunch of people. Roland Hedberg's library So there's a bunch of universities in Europe kind of following this pattern now. So I think from an interoperability point of view, it's looking pretty good. So yeah, I mean, I would like to suggest that we move to a working group last call this week sometime. And we're very keen to get any feedback that people might have.
So, John Bradley again. As one of the authors, I also support last call. Just want to point out that this is a BCP, so we can update it from time to time as these, and that's why it's called the best current practice. So we have to update it to keep it current, but we can't update it to keep it current until we actually do it for the first time. And since there are, people, Ping will probably also start deprecating web views in our for logins in our products, even for SAML, et cetera, because they are actually a security challenge. So getting this out and have it referenceable when we start announcing deprecations would be a good thing.
Thanks, John. Yeah, that's a very good point, I think. And
I also will point out in the core OAuth spec, it says you should use the system web browser. We didn't actually have web views at the time if we had seen web views at the time, we probably would have said, don't do that, but they came along afterwards. So now we actually have to clarify that when we said system browser, we actually meant system browser.
Yeah, I think the discussion in OAuth 2 spec of the native apps pattern is about 1 paragraph long. So it very much was a new phenomenon at the time. And yeah, the idea of this is just to clarify the best practice around that.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll issue a working group last call unless someone has some objections. Brian, you do have objections? Or?
This is Brian. No, I actually came up to support the moving it forward. Just to give sort of an anecdotal example, I was talking to a systems integrator that we work with recently, and he was asking me about OAuth and single sign-on and native, and I reiterated that this draft is like the source of information. He said, yeah, I've read it, but it's not real yet. So I think moving it to a real BCP would be a signal that to people that aren't directly involved with this group and don't know exactly the status of things, that this is something that they should take seriously. So
yes, but I attended this OAuth security workshop. I also had a side meeting where the students gave presentations on projects that they have been doing, and they also used your library and were able to successfully sort of work on the code in I would say they had other things to do as well, so in a very short time frame, and they were quite happy with the work. Yeah, so it's definitely a useful piece for everyone, like the library, to get sort of code working on your mobile phone or tablet to integrate with existing OAuth deployments. It's always helpful.
can I ask 2 questions on here?
Go.
Mm-hmm. In the command line example you showed, how was the callback being handled in that? Did you spin up a local web server?
Right, that's a good question. So the desktop apps in these presentations were using actually the loopback IP address.
Oh, they were.
So one thing I learned while I was developing these samples was that actually the loopback is actually superior to localhost. They're almost the same, but with the localhost you could potentially get a connection that's from an internal IP or even an external IP if your server is exposed. So the nice thing about the loopback IP is it's only accessible by local apps, and typically speaking, at least in my experience, there was no need to create any firewall rule or have any kind of user click on a firewall rule when it was the loopback IP. So I think most firewalls have like a loopback exception because it's effectively same device communication.
Interesting.
And yeah, so one thing to note actually is that there are 3 kind of methods defined in the spec for the redirect URI, and all of them share the same property that the code will only be delivered to a native app. So there are some ways you can try and identify what app the native app is, although it's typically a very big challenge with a native app. Typically, the user can spoof other native apps. But the good thing is, at least with all 3 redirect methods here, that you know for certain that only an actual native app can get the code. So custom URI scheme, a claimed redirect, or a loopback IP, these are things that a remote server cannot use. And so there's that very nice security property. And we kind of think that if the user has already installed a malicious native app, then interception of OAuth codes may not actually be the worst thing that app can do. So I think, it is important, I think, from a security point of view. And we have a couple of redirect URIs for native apps that are not in those three, and we're probably going to deprecate those along with WebView when we can, for the reason that some of them, are a little bit more phishable.
Did you run into, or do you have any experience or advice about port conflicts on the loopback connection? And it's no big deal when you're just one, but if that becomes more popular, that as well as registering the port and the redirect URI?
Right. So when it comes to the port, what we suggest in the BCP is that when you're doing the pattern matching on the redirect URI, that you allow any port.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
Right. So effectively, in this particular case, depending how you actually implement your clients, like the way we implement it, we say, well, there's a native app, and that automatically provisions the loopback IP. So the developer doesn't actually have to register anything for that. And so then the sample code, the third link there, it just picks a random port, and so because the thing is, the port doesn't really help the identification of the app. What's important is that because it's the loopback IP, it can only go back to a native app.
That makes sense.
Right. Well, I think it's the responsibility of the app to find a vacant port when it constructs the request. Now, if you're talking about eavesdropping, or you're talking about like,
It's just working.
so I'm pretty sure there should be a way to get a vacant port.
You have to try multiple times, it's failed.
Potentially.
You do that
Yeah.
before you send the authorization request, and then include the port that you've claimed.
Right. So you start up the web server and then you use it.
And on the authorization server side, there has to be matching rules that account for any port,
Exactly.
which I think may be similar to how you had some stuff around changing how servers do matching rules around custom schemes and so forth. There may be some advice necessary too on allowing that. I'm betting a lot of servers, including our own, do an exact match on port.
Yeah, we should look at that. But if you actually look at the sample code, it's really short. If you printed it, it would be about 2 pages. Basically just starts listening on a port, does the request, waits for the response, and resumes. It's actually quite trivial.
Makes sense. I'm just imagining my server rejecting that right now, because I think the registrations will do an exact match against the port. So, and I bet I'm not the only one.
Right. So
just advice.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could even have like a sort of implementation appendix talking about that. But the way Google does it is we just have like a few different types of clients. So one type is like native app, which sort of, rather than having you register, loopback IP, it's just handled for you.
Automatical. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you could potentially even light up like all the different native options potentially, depending on how you want to do it. Yeah, and I guess just a quick word on potential like interception, because obviously anything kind of going over the IP stack could be intercepted by something on the machine. So the good thing is, because of Pixie, then it doesn't really matter. Like all of these 3 redirect URI choices are all protected by Pixie. So
yep.
And it's kind of, to me, it really validates like why we need Pixie actually. So anytime you're doing like a non-HTTPS redirect, Pixie is probably important because
Cool. Thanks.
So do we have some reviewers for the working group last call? So we get something. I'm planning to start the working group last call this week. So it would be good to know if someone of you is. Brian. Let's see, Brian.
Okay. Thank you.
Thorsten, okay.
Can you spell out the names?
Yeah, so I had Brian, Dick, Thorsten. Anyone else? I think that's good. Of course, Derek and I will have to review all the documents anyway. So.
Great.
And Mike Jones, I know that this is your intent, but just to capture for the minutes, we will get the new appendix and then start working group last call, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's the intention. So I'll get that out this week.
Mm-hmm. So do you have the text already? Or you?
I don't, but I'll get that done this week.
Okay. But
it doesn't change. It doesn't change.
You need to get the feedback first, because presumably you don't have it. You don't have that, or do you? Do you have that? Then do you know what to write about Windows yourself, or is this something you would get from Tony or Mike also?
That's an open question. I certainly can do it. I have enough. So I wrote those samples intended for our Google developers on how to do Oauth.
Okay.
So I can certainly based on that. And Mike and I had a conversation with Vittorio too. So if he has any feedback on that, then we can incorporate that too.
So maybe you can submit a new document version this week, and then we kick this off.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, I will certainly have the Microsoft developer identity people look at it once the new text is in place.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, and it should be noted that this pattern is really just the best practice for doing the standards-based Oauth. It doesn't replace any proprietary native solutions. So I know we have one on Android. We have a number on Android actually, and I believe there are some on Windows. And so this is not actually trying to replace that. It's really just like if you just want to do a web-based Oauth flow on a native app, this is what we think the best practice is. If you want to optimize for a particular pattern using a particular proprietary method, then that's certainly valid as well. It's not excluded by this best practice is what I want to say.
Yep.
All right, thanks everybody.
Good.
All right, so second topic today, and this is the Oauth device flow. This one has an interesting history. It was actually part of an old Oauth 2 draft, but was removed. I think there was maybe a lack of like interop testing at the time, so it was dropped from the Oauth 2 draft. But it turns out a few of us actually went ahead and implemented it anyway. And we sort of more or less arrived at the same conclusions, but not exactly. And so along with Mike and a few other people, we're hoping to now bring this and make it a standard document. So it really should probably be called the Oauth for Limited Input Device Flow. I don't know if we want to make the title a mouthful like that, but obviously this is not like Android, Windows Phone, iOS devices, which are very capable of accepting user input and doing an Oauth flow, as I demonstrated earlier. This is really the type of device that has to meet these three requirements. One is that it has an internet connection. The second is that there's some one-way communication channel to the user. Now, this could be visually. The user could, maybe the user can see the TV because they have to get the code. So it could be audio. Then there needs to be some communication channel there. And the user has to have a capable secondary device. So let's talk about what this is not for. It is definitely not for setting up an initial device, such as a light bulb. Because if the light bulb has no internet connection, you can't do an Oauth for devices flow to set it up. So this is sort of relevant later in the stage. So for example, Google uses this on say Xbox with the YouTube app, where you've already set up your device, it's already got a connection, and it can display a code to the user. Then the user can authenticate to YouTube. So that's sort of the primary case. We've also seen printers use this, so people that want to connect like a cloud printer to a Google Drive, this is a fairly common option as well. And this is kind of roughly how it works. So the TV, the device here, does a device auth request, and this is a little bit different to the regular auth request. It basically just asks the server for a device code and a user code. The user code it displays along with the URL. And then it basically just starts polling the token endpoint with the device code. And if the user approves or rejects the request, that device code will sooner or later either be a success or an error. The user then has to open up their device, type in that URL, and enter the kind of pairing code to link it up. If you want to see a production example, this is what it looks like. This is the YouTube app. You can actually just visit youtube.com/TV on any device, and it'll sort of show you like the TV app experience. So you can try that out. This is our documentation and Facebook's documentation, which does definitely vary. I don't know if there's if anybody else has other docs they can share with me. I'd be glad to circulate them. I wasn't aware of. I'm sure there are other implementations, but I haven't necessarily found them.
Yeah, there's these guys from the European Broadcasting Authority who contacted us earlier this year. They are also using that sort of flow, and they have their own documentation for their
right
sort of clientele.
Right. That's a good point. So brief word, this is actually not in the doc yet, but I realized this morning that I probably should put it in the doc. So we have quite a few people going through this flow for YouTube. So I did do a bit of research on how to improve the code that's presented to the user. And I came to the following conclusions. One is that this is a really, there's a question?
Well, I'm Ole Johansson. Ole Johansson, define alphabetic. This is in 2016. Define alphabetic. Thank you.
ASCII characters between code point.
It's not in the spec yet. It will be put in the spec.
So character points under 128 bits that are in the alphabet A to Z.
All right, if
Your
you,
example uses a dash.
The dash is for formatting.
yeah, there are these things called proquints. You can go Google for proquint. Leif Johansson.
Okay.
Actually, it's a way to encode well, 32 multiple of 32-bit numbers as something that looks sort of pronounceable.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I might have heard of that.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty cool way to represent a random number as something you definitely could type and it's hard to confuse with other stuff.
That is good feedback. So this is roughly what we came up with. I'm not saying it's this is not normative or is it prescriptive, but most people are signing in on a device, on a secondary device, I should say, like a phone, and phones typically work best when you don't have to like switch between the number and the alphabetic keyboard. So that's why we suggest the second point, case insensitive, again, because it's kind of hard to like shift the case. Avoiding O and I are just recommended to avoid ambiguity. So that basically left us with base 64, and we turned that into an 8-digit base 64 number with a formatting of a dash. Anyway, just a tip there. When the code was a combination of uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, we had a much lower completion rate. So. All right, so the next steps, we did a bit of work on this draft before this meeting, so I think it's kind of in a state where it can actually be reviewed now, although there's a couple of bits missing. For example, we need to add this sort of device auth endpoint to discovery. So device auth doesn't use the regular auth to authorization endpoint because it's kind of quite a different interaction. The device is sort of asking for this device code, and it's getting back a JSON dictionary. It'll never get back a success or a fail from that endpoint, so it's like a little bit special. That's it.
Thorsten Rohrstedt, one question. I just skimmed through the document and it doesn't contain a security consideration right now. So my question is, what's your story in session fixation? Because as far as I remember, one of the reasons why we dropped the device flow in the beginning was there wasn't a recounter measure against session fixation.
Session fixation.
Session fixation.
I think the reason we haven't added that section is it's going to be a very long section, and we will definitely add one. I know Google engineers have a lot to say about this flow. We actually have locked it down to about 12 different scopes, which is less than ideal because it limits where it can be used. The main reason that we locked it down is the inherent phishability of having the ability for like a remote machine to request the code and then sort of try and phish the user, get them to type that code in, and because it's not on the same device, it's like really hard to run risk analysis, at least on that environment. So that we will definitely add it, and it'll definitely be quite lengthy, I think.
Dick Hart, Amazon Web Services. A couple questions. One, I haven't looked at the spec, but is there any mechanism for the device to identify itself?
With some like device identifier number or like?
Signing with asserted has or something so that you know which device it is at the other end?
That's not in the spec, but probably should be.
Okay. The other question I have is, did you intentionally exclude things where there's no UX with the device? You know, something that maybe there's an app talking to the device over Bluetooth, because that's a fairly common pattern now.
I don't think that's excluded. So as long as there's I mean, if you have a two-way Bluetooth connection, you might be able to do something better than this. If it's a one-way channel, this is sort of more for the one-way channel flows.
Right.
Mostly because if you have a two-way channel, you can return the authorization code on that channel, which might give you some security benefits.
Right.
But so let's say it's just like a Bluetooth beacon with a one-way communication. Yes, that is a valid way to use this. So it's not excluded. The other thing would be like an audio, like a code that's just read out like A, B, C,
Right. Okay, what if it doesn't have any of that, but you have an app that just talks to Bluetooth?
Then I think maybe just regular Oauth could work, where the user agent is effectively the companion app. Do you think that makes sense? So it's effectively like open this URL, which happens to open on another device, but that's kind of just implementation detail.
Right. I guess when I think of the device being able to have a cert and OAuth, that Bluetooth and the device having a cert sort of changes the dynamics from OAuth.
Right.
That's an interesting pattern, I think. It fits into a very large set of devices that don't have
Right.
a UX. Maybe we can think about that in the spec.
Yeah, let's definitely think about it.
Okay.
I think as written, this is not trying to solve necessarily that use case. This is sort of it's like the fallback of fallbacks where literally all it can do is display a code and poll an endpoint. I think we can do something better. I hope we can do something better in your case.
Okay.
Yeah.
But would you think that would be included in this, or?
Potentially. Let's talk about it. Maybe this one, or maybe, yeah.
Ouch. John Bradley again. I think to Dick's question, I think some of that may be actually covered in ACE and some of that OAuth work group. So we have to probably try to avoid this spec stepping on some of the ACE stuff, but it's probably worth coordinating.
I'm not 100% sure if it actually is ACE. But.
Well, ACE does have that three-party flow, at least in one of the ACE documents I saw. My question is, in some cases, such as a TV, you may have a remote control or something else that may give you the ability to have some limited input, such as typing in a phone number or something. I think there have been some discussions about allowing a mode where if the device knows an identifier for the user, you could trigger a push notification sort of flow rather than forcing the user to type in a URL, which 90% of them will fail to do correctly. So there may be improvements in this with being able to do some sort of push notification. Is that considered to be an update for this, for the next version of this?
We could talk about that, particularly in implementation details. Aside from possibly like a hint type parameter, I think it's mostly the spec. It could be implemented that way, and it's sort of agnostic to.
Right.
To the
so
protocol.
We would have to have something like a user hint from that we have in other specs, but.
Yeah, this is a good open question in my mind, actually. Like, because this is not the authorization endpoint, we've sort of lost some of the authorization endpoint extensions. Is there a neat way of adding those back in, such as login hint and things like that? Do we sort of define this endpoint as saying that, with the exception of a couple of things like redirect URI, which doesn't make sense, are we going to allow all parameters that are authorization request parameters? So that's an
Those
open
would be
topic.
good questions, yes.
Yeah. I guess your suggestion is that we should.
I think that a popular flow would be putting in an identifier into the device and having it send, like many of the authentication systems now, where Google is now sending push notifications to my phone, Twitter, on and on and on. If the device allows you to do an identifier first flow, then using the multi-factor authentication that's already set up may be much a lower cognitive bar for people. If you're used to typing in your Google identifier and having a message come to your phone and the notification screen hitting yes, I want to log in, being able to keep it consistent with the way that people, we're training people to work in a particular way. If we can keep aligned with that, I think people will have a much easier time adjusting to it.
Yeah, I think this pattern works best if you have a native hint selector. It might work for phone numbers. It probably doesn't work for email addresses, just for UX reasons.
But some people are going to start taking phone numbers as user identifiers.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Scott Hollenbeck. Those of you who are in Buenos Aires may remember, even though this was at the very tail end of the meeting when people were running out of the room, I stood up and asked for some folks to take a look at an internet draft I wrote that's describing the use of OpenID Connect to support client authentication in a new protocol called RDAP, the Registration Data Access Protocol. If you're familiar with you're familiar with the things it doesn't do, like client authentication. RDAP was an art area protocol that's intended to provide some capabilities for clients to be identified using federated authentication technologies. Now, interesting thing about that is though RDAP is a web service, there are web accessible clients like wget and curl where you cannot assume that you have access to a browser. And so I am very interested in looking at this concept in a bit more detail to see if and how it might be useful for who is like clients who are using tools like wget and curl. So thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, let's have a conversation. Look at that. We have the same problem, by the way. Like with a kind of cloud-based CLI tool that could be running on a remote server with no UI. So yeah.
Ole Johansson, I live in a world of telephony where we have very stupid devices with very limited input. We have numbers, digits. But there are things happening there. I just wanted to touch base. When you talk about phone numbers, we have a working group called STIR that creates JSON web tokens for phone numbers, assigned numbers, and CPURIs that may touch on this. On the other hand, we're also investigating opportunities to move away from digest MD5, and one of the options is Oauth. So chances are that if we go for Oauth, that your work will come back to our stupid phones with limited user interfaces. But you should be aware of the STIR if you're looking into phone number authentication.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely look at that. John, I think, mentioned that perhaps the Mobile Connect work group of the OpenID Foundation might be interested in this type of flow as well.
Just know of that. Just information about that. At the Moderna working group, that's the name. Yeah. We are working on a mechanism to do author-band authentication, and then user identifier based on a mobile phone number could be one basis to kick that flow off. It's ought to be an extension to the OpenID Connect specification and new endpoint potentially. We still have to sort it out, but I think we should have a discussion about how this could fit together.
Great.
Yeah.
So my sense from the discussion is that we're probably not going to be finalizing this for a while, but let's get all these use cases on the table and make sure what we come up with can solve a bunch of them. I mean, there's certainly no rush from my point of view. We've already deployed this and people are using it. So it's really about trying to get this right, I think. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I guess we'll have to push the completion date to I don't know, beginning of next year, end of this year or so. Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's good feedback.
Thanks, everybody.
Ludwig, did you capture? There were lots of items to look into. Were you able to capture most of them? I wrote down some notes as well. Okay. Good. Mike.
If the speakers could have a look at the Etherpad and correct the parts of their statements I got wrong, that would be really helpful. I tried, but you speak faster than I can type.
Hello, I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft, and I worked with Phil Hunt of Oracle and my colleague Tony Nadal on a very short draft on authentication method reference values. Next. The document has been stable for essentially its whole life. There's been a couple tweaks to particular names based on input from people's use cases. We did get one piece of feedback from NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards, that they wanted to be sure that there were separate identifiers for retina and iris scanning biometrics because they have very different characteristics. So that was done. In terms of usage, this is used by the OpenID Connect Moderna authentication specification, which is the mobile profile of Connect that Tristan was talking about. Some of the Google authentication flows use it. Some of the Microsoft authentication flows use it. Essentially what this does is just create a registry for values that are already in existence with the expectation that more will get defined. I know of no open issues with the draft. Feedback came in, has been incorporated, and it's stopped as far as I can tell. So next slide. My question to the chairs is this time, and to the working group, is it time for working group last call?
So are there any objections against starting the working group last call? We had some discussions earlier this year where the people thought that it required a little bit more look, but you've shipped several updates since then.
Right, that's the feedback that was incorporated, including from the chairs who wanted more description of the use case for it when it went into the introduction.
Okay, yeah, well, don't see anyone jumping to the mic other than William.
William Dennis, not objecting, but just saying that I agree. I think it's time to make it a working group last call. Like as Mike said, we're using it in production, so good to get it done.
Thorsten again. I second that. I would also like to move that for working group last call. It has some benefits. It contributes a lot, and we use it as a foundation for our Moderna work. So let's move it forward.
Good. So we'll do that.
Thank you all.
Okay. We actually managed to get through the agenda in ahead of time. But we have other things to discuss. For Wednesday, we have, as you saw, I split the items to those 2 days roughly equally, but there's also a conversation I want to have with various folks who are involved in the security work, and everyone is of course invited. We are going to meet tomorrow evening after the last session, which is at 6:20, I think. 18:20, and we are going to meet at the registration desk in case someone wants to show up. And I included that information in the uploaded agenda page.
Doesn't that collide with the social event? Yes.
Well, if you go to the social event, then you can't at the same time go. Yeah, you can't. This is a busy week. Do you go to the social event? And yeah, where we are going to meet at the IETF registration desk, and then I will figure out whether we can get a room.
There's a table at the beer garden.
We can also go to the beer garden later on. Yeah. Anything else you would like to discuss today? Presumably, you guys haven't worked on slides for Wednesday yet, which we can sort of like start now, or like the metadata. Did you?
There will be slides for metadata. This is Mike Jones.
But you haven't written them yet.
No, haven't written them yet, and I'm not going to preview the content here at the mic. I will say, and this was said at the beginning, but while everybody's here, that those of you who are interested in token binding, while we will have an OAuth token binding discussion on Wednesday, part of the reason the token binding drafts were done was to do gap analysis for the token binding working group. The token binding working group meets tomorrow, and we will be having that gap discussion there. So to the extent that you'd like to use token binding with, in particular, OAuth access tokens, there's some interesting engineering choices that we need to work out as joint working groups. So if you're interested, come to token binding tomorrow as well.
Good. Here are the details for the meeting I was just talking about. Good. And with that, I give you 10 minutes back.
General comment from the note taker. Please put slide numbers on your slides. Otherwise, it's really hard to reference them in the notes.
Thanks. Oh, the blue sheet. Do you guys, where's the blue sheet? Has everyone signed the blue sheet? Oh my God. Okay, please sign the blue sheet. No, the other one. I'll send one around. We don't need two.
Where's blue sheet? Blue sheet. We are looking for blue sheet.
Yeah, please make sure that you sign it.